Who are the greatest comic book artists of all time? It's a great question, a challenging one, but one worth taking a long look at. This video takes a look at the top 50 artists, and it's what I would call a composite or combined list based on other lists I've been able to research on the internet. A few notes: this list is very North American centric, so I apologize to all my international viewers for not being inclusive of other greats from other continents. And this is not my own personal list, but there are many artists in this list that I would certainly include in my top 50. Coming in at number 50 is Arthur Adams. And in this list, I'm also going to include kind of a composite score, which is based on how they were ranked in these other lists. Now, Arthur Adams is well known for his work in the 1980s and 1990s, where he did Longshot, which was a limited series when it first came out. And when you looked at his initial work, you knew it was something special. It's very detailed and, from what I understand, very labor intensive. One of my favorite issues by him was this New Mutant Specials, which he did, which I really felt was kind of like, his peak work. Since then, he's certainly focused more on covers. He doesn't do as many interior pencils. I think part of that is because his work certainly feels very detailed, very labor intensive, and so it's very time consuming. Number 49 is Bill Everett with a score of 83.7. Bill Everett is well known for his initial work at Timely. He's basically the artist who designed the Submariner who first appeared in Marvel Comics #1. There may be a lot of artists in this list that you may not be well aware of, and they come from like the golden age of comic books. Bill Everett's peak work certainly feels like it was during the 40s and the 50s when he worked for Timely and Atlas, and he also did some pretty astonishing covers as well too, particularly for this series called Venus. And there's one particular cover that is highly sought after by collectors. He would also do work into the 1960s and 70s, and certainly the most notable of this is Daredevil. He was the artist who did the first issue of Daredevil. But, as he got older, the amount of time that it took him to do his work certainly took longer. So he wasn't able to maintain a regular schedule. And as well, sadly, with a lot of these artists, they fall into a lot of personal challenges as well too, which was also the same with Bill Everett. But he actually did work into the 1970s, doing some work on Submariner for Marvel Comics, I think, which was great because this was the one character he is, probably the best identified with. Number 48 is Frank Quitely, and often Frank Quitely is associated with the writer Grant Morrison, and he's done some pretty exceptional work with Grant, particularly All-Star Superman, which he's well known for. When I came across one of these lists of the top comic book artists, they focused on 4 areas: technique, storytelling, accomplishments, and longevity. And certainly with Frank Quitely, his technique is very interesting, very detailed, and his storytelling is excellent. There's also another series he did called We Three, which I really enjoyed, that looks at these kind of like cyber animals. And it's also, as a pet owner, like really a really touching like series, and I highly encourage you to check that out. Now, his work doesn't appeal to everyone because it is a quite unique style, but I do feel he's well deserving to be on this list for the top 50 artists. I highly recommend checking out All-Star Superman, which is also a fantastic series. Coming in at number 47 is John Romita Jr., who scores at 84.0. John Romita Jr. is the son of John Romita Sr., and he has a long career, mostly at Marvel Comic Books, and he has done quite a bit of work. Now, I'm not a huge fan of all of his work, but he has certainly developed his talent and skills over time. Because he's had a long history doing work, I certainly believe his skills in terms of storytelling and accomplishments are very high. I feel like his work in Daredevil in particular in the 1990s was very good. And he's worked on numerous titles over the years and characters that really kind of show, like demonstrate his skill. Number 46 is L.B. Cole, another artist from the golden age of comic books. Now, I think the best way to kind of really show examples of his work is this wonderful book that I was able to purchase called Black Light. And I'm going to flip through a number of these pages. He is very well known for his outstanding covers in the golden age, as well as the coloring of these covers, which I understand he also had quite a bit of influence in terms of how these covers looked. I think the range of the work that he did in the golden age is incredible, from science fiction to romance and to horror. It feels like his strengths are more as, I would say, as an illustrator and design work than as necessarily in terms of his storytelling. But certainly his technique is amazing, and you can just, like, when you see his covers, you can just sense how good they are. L.B. Cole, number 46, not a surprise for me that he's included in this list. I mentioned this was a composite list, and what I did was I combined 3 lists that I found that I felt had enough weight or credibility. Actually, to my surprise, I thought there were going to be more lists out there on the internet, but not so many when you're talking about all the different artists from the different eras, from the Golden Age, Silver Age, even to the Modern Age. So, one of these lists definitely was more Golden Age centric, or artists who had been around for a period of time from the 1940s to the 1980s. And another one was kind of more modern focused, because it was more of a poll. Comic Book Resources does this every once in a while, where they ask their viewers, who are their favorite artists. And they get a lot of responses, like over 1,000. So I thought this list was also worth taking a look at. Coming in at number 45 is Joe Maneely with a score of 84.4. Stan Lee once said that Joe Maneely could have been the next Jack Kirby because his skill, his ability to produce high quality work at the rate that he did was incredible. And it's really sad because he had a tragic end, when Stan Lee had to let, a bunch of artists go when Atlas basically collapsed. Joe Maneely, essentially passed away that night when they say that he drank too much and he fell on the train tracks and he died. But there's no question that the work that he did during his time at Atlas was incredible, especially the sheer amount of work that he did. And he had great range, but certainly one title in particular that I think deserves special mention is his run on The Black Knight. But he did a lot of Western, a lot of war, even romance. He certainly had the range, the output, and his ability in terms of storytelling was also excellent. Had he continued to work, after when Marvel came back, no doubt he would have ranked higher. Number 44 is Mike Ploog with a score of 84.5. And this one, I was happy to see Mike Ploog be up so high, considering that some of his other contemporaries of that time, like Frank Brunner or Jim Starlin, didn't make the top 50. But there is something special about his work. He studied under Will Eisner, and you can definitely see the influence of Will Eisner's work on him. Mike Ploog is well known for his work at Marvel in the early 1970s, from Man-Thing to Ghost Rider, but what you may not know is that, he kind of left the comic book industry to work on illustrations for a children's book, and he came back and did a one-shot for Classics Illustrated, Tom Sawyer, and I highly recommend that you search that out and take a look at the work that he did there. But his fantasy work, his work at Marvel certainly is worth taking a look at. He's one of my favorites from the 1970s, and that's Mike Ploog. One of the few Europeans to make this list is Jean Giraud, or known as Mobius, and he scores at 85.3. If you certainly include his work that he did in Europe, he would rank higher. And the comic book work that he did in North America certainly was still excellent and highly regarded, particularly the Silver Surfer, as well as some of the stuff he did for heavy metal. What's interesting about Mobius is that he changed his name because he wanted to basically have a separation from the work that he did before as kind of as an illustrator to moving towards a kind of science fiction style of work. And you can certainly see how his style changed in the 1980s up through the 1990s. A very highly regarded artist, and certainly well deserving to be in this list. Coming in at number 42 is Carl Barks with a score of 85.3. Carl Barks is also known as the Good Duck Artist, and he did a lot of work on Donald Duck comic books for several years, for decades. And for a long period of time, actually, a lot of people did not know who this incredible artist and writer was working behind these comic books. And well, to be honest, I haven't read too many of the Donald Duck stories, but from a lot of people, from what I understand, these were certainly some of the best comic books that came out during that time. Sadly, he was not rewarded well for the work that he did, and often, like some of these comic books back then, sold over 1 million copies a month, which made a lot of money for Disney at that time. Now, thankfully, he would later go on to do some incredible paintings that he would be able to sell to fans. And it's also kind of interesting to note that early Carl Barks Donald Duck comic books were at one time some of the most valuable comic books out there compared to other comic books at that time. They were that sought after and they were that popular with collectors. And now these days, they still have some value, but nowhere near the same relative value they used to have decades ago, like in the 1970s. But these are some excellent comic books, and I think what's amazing about these comic books as well, too, is that they're suited for all ages. Like young and old can enjoy these wonderful stories written by and drawn by this master, Carl Barks. Number 41 is Jerry Robinson, and he is associated a lot with Batman. His score is 85.6, and he was predominantly a Golden Age artist, so he did a lot of work on Batman in the 1940s and onward. And he's also credited to be the co-creator of the Joker as well as Robin, like two major characters in the DC universe. There may be a lot of artists you haven't heard of on this list, and many of them have long left us, and comic books have been around for a very long time, so I hope this list will encourage you to check out some of their work if you haven't. Now, certainly, some of them may not be as technically, how would you say, skilled as what you would compare to what you see today, but these were the artists, the pioneers, who created really wonderful work at that time and can be greatly appreciated for the work they did and what they contributed to this medium. Number 40 is Jim Lee with a score of 86. For me, Jim Lee would rate a lot higher. Jim Lee has done some incredible work for Marvel and DC, and although he doesn't really do work anymore as like the president of DC, I'm sure he can still, if he wanted to, draw some amazing comic books. What's interesting about Jim Lee is I have a friend who told me that originally he was going to study something else. Like he was also a very, smart, gifted student. And he asked his family if it was okay to pursue his career in art. And if you know anything about Korean families, because, my background is Korean, that would be a very difficult conversation to have with your parents. But they gave him the freedom to explore, the work that he did. And, I'm sure when they look at what he's accomplished now, it's like they would be very proud and happy parents. Jim Lee's work is just, to me, is exceptional. There's an excitement, there's a quality to his work. It's top notch. That's the only way that I can say. Like his work on X-Men, as well as his stuff on Batman and even Superman, is just incredible. Number 39 is John Severin with a score of 86.3. John Severin was one of the many quality artists to come out of EC Comics in the 1950s, but he also did work in the 1940s as well. He also has a younger sister who worked in the industry, one of the few women, a giant in talent as well, to succeed in comic books. John Severin's work was primarily on like war and Western titles, and he had a very distinctive style that is, pretty recognizable. His strengths, I feel, are certainly in the storytelling aspect. Much like many of the other EC artists at that time, there's this kind of grittiness, this realism to his work, and he was also very prolific. He did a lot of work. So John Severin coming in at number 39. Number 38 is Bernard Bailey, and he was a golden age artist for DC in the 1940s and onward. And he is responsible, along with Siegel, in creating the Spectre. And, there are some astonishingly good covers that he did, Spectre covers that he did for DC in the 1940s, in the title More Fun. Now, he's probably not as well known of an artist, but, he also did a lot of work in the 1950s in various horror titles. They have really quite an interesting quality to them. Like, you may say, like, technically they're not as realistic, but there is certainly this kind of bizarre horror element to them, this quality to them that really is kind of unique to him. So he certainly had the longevity, the creativity, and the range of many different genres in comic books. It's certainly worth checking out some of his work. Number 37 is Reed Crandall, scoring 86.6. And to me, like, Reed Crandall is what I would call a fine craftsman of the comic book medium. He's known for a long period of work from the 40s, stuff like modern military comics like Black Hawk, and then in the 1950s moving to EC and doing some incredible work there. But again, he has an incredible range, and there's just this fine art quality to his work. In the detail, in the storytelling, everything. He is truly a gifted artist and one of the all-time greats. Number 36 is Dave Gibbons, scoring 87.0. I think a lot of weight is given to Mr. Gibbons on his work for Watchmen, and this was the seminal piece that came out in 1986, written by Alan Moore, and certainly considered to be one of the greatest comic book series of all time. He did some other work, including a collaboration with Frank Miller, as well as doing some work in the UK earlier. I don't think I would place him this high as 36, but I understand why many considered him to be one of the greatest artists. Just if alone for Watchmen and some of the work, his other work that he collaborated with Alan Moore and his other work at DC. Number 35 is Mike Kaluta, scoring 87.1, and predominantly a artist who worked for DC in the 1970s through to the 1980s. Very well known for his striking horror covers, especially in the different House of Mystery, House of Secrets covers, as well as doing some interior work. This genre suited his skills very well, as well as fantasy work. That's probably one of the areas that he's a little underappreciated in. He also had a spectacular short run in The Shadow in the early 1970s, but there's just a fine quality to his work his strengths are almost more on the illustration side, more than I would say with regards to storytelling. He would also be in my top 50 as well. Number 34 is Johnny Craig, scoring 87.7. And I bet the weight of his ranking here is based on pretty much all of the work he did at EC Comics in the 1950s. He would later certainly do some more work for Mad Magazine for many years, but Johnny Craig's controversial covers for EC are well known to comic book collectors. You know, certainly the horror and crime titles that he worked on for EC are standouts, and certainly the work inside as well too. And he has a very distinctive style. Certainly, like, I appreciate the work he did for EC, along with many of the other exceptional artists who worked at that company for that time. Number 33 is Alex Toth, scoring 88.1. Alex Toth is another Golden Age artist. I remember listening to an interview, and a lot of artists consider him to be a master. More so, his contemporaries believe in his exceptional skill than necessarily comic book fans. I always thought his artwork was fine, but not anything extraordinary. But if a lot of the other artists admire his work, then that has to say something. He certainly worked in many different genres and for many decades, so his body of work is certainly there. Number 32 is Mac Raboy. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, scoring 88.7. Mac Raboy is certainly well known for the work he did at Fawcett in the 1940s, and certainly if you look at the covers that he did, there is an exceptional quality to them. The line work, the detail, there's just a beauty to his work. What you may not know is that he did a lot of comic strip work for Flash Gordon, and the artwork there as well is superb. Now, in this list, a lot of well-known comic strip artists are omitted. So Milt Caniff, Hal Foster, Alex Raymond didn't make this list because they predominantly did their work in comic strips. Mac Raboy is one artist who actually did a fair amount of work in both areas. And he's an artist that is certainly worth checking out. Brian Bolland, with a score of 88.7, comes in at number 31. And he really is a tremendous artist. And again, like many other artists in this list, has a great range working in different genres. He primarily worked at DC in North America, but before then he did a lot of work in the UK. Some of his stuff that he's well known for is the work he did in Judge Dredd. Perhaps his most significant work is the work he did on The Killing Joke with Alan Moore. And it's interesting to say that Alan Moore, so well known for his writing, actually felt that Brian Bolland's work exceeded his work in that one instance for that one-shot story. One of the greatest single-issue stories of all time, The Killing Joke, because of Brian Bolland's superb artwork. Number 30 is Graham Ingalls with a score of 89. Another Golden Age artist, very well known for the work he did at EC Comics, but he also did work before EC, and you look at some of the covers he did, and they were fantastic. The level of detail in his work at EC, though, was something else, and he would be a strong influence on other artists going forward. Now, sadly, Graham Ingalls, towards the end of his career, had a lot of personal issues, which is really sad. And his work really is, to me, exceptional and like one of my favorite artists of that time period. Some of his horror stuff at EC is some of the best of all time. Number 29 is Alex Schomburg, who is very well known for the covers he did at Timely in the 1940s and onward. You look at some of the covers and they are just jam-packed with action. Like, it's almost sensory overload. The work he did for Timely or Marvel Comics at that time is just outstanding, and he was kind of in a class of his own, I feel, when it came to these kind of covers that just packed in so much action on one cover. He would come back and actually do some work in the 1970s for an Invaders annual, which I think is extremely fitting. And, you know, he still showed that he still had the ability to do these fantastic covers. Number 28 is Russ Heath, an exceptional artist who did a lot of work for DC from the 50s and onward, particularly the war titles. And he was also known for doing these covers which are called gray tone or wash tone covers. And some of the ones he did for DC, like in GI Combat and for Sea Devils, are really, in my opinion, really quite breathtaking. One of my favorite artists from DC from the Silver Age. Number 27 is Basil Wolverton with a score of 89.9, and Basil Wolverton is a very unique artist on this list because if you look at his work, it has a very unique style. Like, I wonder what went on in his brain, because some of the ideas or the designs and characters he came up with are just outrageous, and they're quite special. So he's well known for the covers he did for Plop, but as well as a strip called Powerhouse Pepper that he did in the golden age of comics. A very unique style that would also be a trendsetter, especially for underground comic books later in the 60s and 1970s. Number 26 is Gene Colan, an extremely versatile artist who had a very long career working in various genres. Probably his peak is the 1960s when he worked at Marvel. He worked on a number of different titles, primarily on Daredevil. A lot of people associate him as the finest artist for Daredevil in the 1960s. And you can really see it. There's just this fluidity, this gracefulness for Daredevil that's just perfect for the character. And then in the 1970s, he would work on one of the greatest horror titles of all time, and that's Tomb of Dracula. And again, his penciling was just perfect for that title. A career spanning decades, one of the finest comic book artists of all time. So there you have it, numbers 50 to number 26 of the greatest artists of all time. And again, this was a composite list. There's a lot more to come in my next video when I look at the top 25 comic book artists of all time, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out another one of my top list videos over here. Until next time, enjoy and read your comic books.